In January 1923, an entire black community in Florida was wiped off the map in 7 days. Homes burned, church burned, school burned. The people were hunted through the swamps like animals. And when it was over, every man responsible walked away free. Not one arrest, not one trial, not one conviction. But the worst part? The story itself was erased. For 60 years, Florida pretended Rosewood never existed. Generations of black Floridians grew up never knowing this town was here, never knowing what happened to the people who lived in it. This is episode 3 of How They Stole It. This is Rosewood. Rosewood wasn't a town of desperation. It was a town of ownership. By 1923, roughly 150 black residents lived in Rosewood, surrounded by the pine forests of Levy County, Florida. They weren't sharecroppers working someone else's land. They owned their homes. They owned their land. They had a church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. They had a schoolhouse. They had a baseball team that played against neighboring towns. Rosewood was small, but it was stable. Black families had been living there since the 1870s, 2 generations deep. The Carrier family, the Goins family, the Edwards family. They raised children, buried their dead in the cemetery behind the church, and kept to themselves. The nearest town was Sumner, a white sawmill community. The 2 towns existed side by side in an uneasy peace. Black men from Rosewood worked at the sawmill in Sumner. White men from Sumner knew Rosewood families by name. The arrangement wasn't friendship, but it was functional, until January 1st, 1923. January 1st, 1923. New Year's Day, a white woman named Fannie Taylor, wife of a Sumner sawmill worker, screams from her home. When neighbors arrive, she tells the same story. A black man broke in and assaulted her. But her neighbors also noticed something else. Fannie's husband, James Taylor, had left town that morning. There were fresh bruises on her face, and rumors had been circulating that Fannie had a white lover, a man James Taylor had already fought with once. The most widely accepted account among historians is this: Fannie Taylor was beaten by her white lover. James Taylor found out. To deflect suspicion, she invented a black attacker. But none of that mattered, because within hours, word spread that a black man from Rosewood had escaped into the woods. A posse formed, bloodhounds were brought in, and the mob's attention zeroed in on one man, Sylvester Carrier. Sylvester Carrier was a black man known throughout Levy County. He worked as a laborer, but he was also a musician, a hunter, and, crucially, a man who refused to bow. White residents described him as arrogant. What they meant was, he didn't grovel. He looked white men in the eye. He had a reputation for saying he would defend his home with his life. The mob believed Sylvester Carrier was hiding the alleged attacker. They were wrong. Carrier was hiding his family and neighbors, because he knew exactly what the mob would do once it arrived in Rosewood. January 2nd. The mob arrives at the Carrier house. Estimated size, 200 to 300 white men. Many of them Klansmen, some from as far away as Georgia and South Carolina. Inside the Carrier home, Sylvester Carrier, his mother, his brother, several other family members, and 2 friends. Total, about 15 people. Several were children. The mob demands they come out. Sylvester Carrier refuses. Gunfire erupts. When it ends, 2 white men are dead. Sylvester Carrier is dead, shot multiple times, his body left in the dirt. His mother, Sarah Carrier, is wounded, but survives. The house is torched, but the mob didn't leave. They had come for a lynching and gotten a gunfight. Now they wanted revenge on every black person in Rosewood. For the next 6 days, white mobs swept through Rosewood systematically. They burned the church. They burned the schoolhouse. They burned every black home they could find. Black residents fled into the swamps, hiding in freezing January water, sometimes for days, while men on horseback hunted them with rifles and dogs. Here's what makes Rosewood different from Tulsa. There were no airplanes, no bombs, no organized militia. This was neighbors turning on neighbors. Men who had worked alongside black sawmill laborers on Monday were hunting them through the woods by Thursday. The exact death toll is unknown. Official records from 1923 claimed 6 black deaths. Survivors placed the number closer to 27. Historians today estimate between 6 and 60. The true number will never be known because many bodies were dumped in unmarked graves in the swamp, or burned inside homes that were never searched for remains. If this story has heroes, they aren't the ones in history books. John Bryce was a white train conductor on the Seaboard Airline Railway. On January 5th, as his train passed through the Rosewood area, he saw black women and children hiding in the woods near the tracks. He stopped the train. Accounts say Bryce refused to leave until every woman and child he could see was loaded onto the train, hiding them in passenger cars, baggage compartments, anywhere they could fit. He took them to Gainesville. If he had stayed on schedule, many of them would have been caught and killed. The Carrier women, Sarah Carrier and her daughters, survived the gunfight and escaped through the swamps. They made it to Gainesville. From there, they scattered. Some to Jacksonville, some to Tampa, some to New York. None ever returned to Rosewood. The survivors of Rosewood didn't just lose homes. They lost land deeds, bank records, family Bibles. The only proof some families had of marriages, births, and property ownership. When they tried to return months later, they found their homes occupied or demolished, and their land claimed by white residents. There was no one to appeal to. The sheriff of Levy County, Robert Walker, had deputized several of the men who participated in the massacre. No black family ever successfully reclaimed their Rosewood property. After the massacre, Levy County did what every town in this series has done. It erased. Newspapers in Florida barely covered the event. When they did, they called it a race riot, implying black residents were equally to blame. The official narrative became trouble near some. No names, no death toll, no investigation. A grand jury was convened in February 1923. It heard testimony from 25 witnesses. It indicted no one. The grand jury foreman later stated that the witnesses could not identify any specific attackers, which was true in a technical sense because the mobs had worn masks. Rosewood survivors scattered across the country. They told their children what happened. Their children told their children. But publicly, the story was buried so completely that even historians specializing in racial violence in America had never heard of Rosewood until 1982. In 1982, a journalist named Gary Moore drove through Levy County and noticed something odd. A town called Rosewood on old maps, but no Rosewood on the ground. No historical marker, no plaque, nothing but pine trees and swamp. Moore's investigation, published in the St. Petersburg Times, was the first public account of the Rosewood Massacre in nearly 60 years. It led survivors to come forward. It led descendants to demand acknowledgement. And it eventually led to something unprecedented in American history. In 1994, the Florida legislature passed the Rosewood Claims Bill. It was the first, and remains one of the only, pieces of legislation in American history in which a state government paid reparations for racial violence. The state awarded $2.1 million to 9 survivors and dozens of descendants. It established a scholarship fund for descendants of Rosewood families. It officially acknowledged that the state of Florida had failed to protect its black citizens. $2.1 million, divided among all claimants, adjusted for what was lost. Generations of land ownership, businesses never started, inheritances never passed down, education never completed. It was a symbolic gesture, a meaningful one, but symbolic. Today, the site of Rosewood is marked by a single historical sign on State Road 24. It reads, Rosewood, a thriving black community destroyed by a mob in January 1923. There are no buildings, no streets, no cemetery. The graves were never found. The pine trees grew back. The swamp reclaimed everything else. Rosewood, Tulsa, Oscarville, Seneca Village, Forsyth County. The pattern is so consistent, you could write the script before you even know the town. A black community builds something. A lie provides the spark. Violence burns through everything they built, and then, most importantly, the story is erased. Laws are written to prevent rebuilding. Land is re-registered under new names. History books skip the chapter. And 100 years later, people drive past the empty field, or the lake, or the highway, and have no idea what lies beneath. This is why How They Stole It exists. Not to make you angry, to make sure you know. Because the erasure is the second crime. And the only way to undo it is to tell the story. Next episode. A black man built a fortune so large that white businessmen in his own city couldn't stand it. They destroyed him, seized his empire, and rewrote the story so completely that his name disappeared from history books for a century. We're doing Jeremiah G. Hamilton, Wall Street's first black millionaire, and why they erased him. Subscribe, hit the bell. We tell these stories one at a time because they don't teach this in school, so we will.